Hello and welcome for another episode of this season of Try This on Wisp Sports. I'm your host, Dr. Kirstin Lauritzen, and today I have a special episode. It's one where I am going to go into some detail, kind of like a case study of an athlete that I recently heard about, talked to. I'm going to try not to give away too many details specifically about this athlete, but it is a situation that she went through that I think, and I feel, I see it in my office, but I see it so often, and I would really like to bring awareness to what is happening specifically to this athlete, but then also what are some things that we can do to change the way that this kind of industry, this sport, the way that just sports in general and losing weight and trying to make weight in sports can be handled a little bit better. So here's the backstory. This athlete is in a sport where there are multiple weight categories. So, you could go into the lightweight category, or you could go into more of like what they would call like the heavyweight category. And this athlete is in her early 20s. So she's, at a very, very high level and also quite young in that sense, and has a lot of time ahead of her as far as in sport. And she also, dabbles a little bit in triathlon as well, which is where this particular athlete was brought to my attention. The backstory, I guess, of how she really got to where she was originally in a different weight class and was not being able to quite make the performance markers that was needed in order for her to be able to compete at a higher level. So the coaches and her made a decision for her to try to lose some weight to get into the lightweight category. This would have been that she needed to lose about 2 pounds per week for a few weeks. I think total she was trying to lose 10 pounds while also training like 15 to 20 hours a week. Now, I will say that that's a very difficult situation to be in, and it really needs to be managed very carefully. She had plenty of time. She had like 7 months to do it. I'm sorry. I actually messed that up. So she needed to lose 10 pounds. She had 7 months to do it. However, she was not given really any guidance. So she tried basically cutting calories and doing, what she thought she needed to do. And then instead of losing weight, she actually gained weight. So then it's closer to when she needed to be the weight that she needed to be for her next race. And she was then told that she needed to lose 2 pounds per week, basically as quickly as possible, while again, still training, still at that 15 to 20 hours a week. So not only did she gain weight, but now she's having to do more, to try to lose weight. And at that point, they gave her advice that was eat a high fiber diet, really high protein, and then no sugar. Meanwhile, this athlete is also already extremely strict with her calories, not necessarily supplementing her diet with enough carbohydrates. I mean, already this athlete is in a low calorie, low energy and energy deficit for sure, not supporting her training, and not also supporting what her body needs in order to function well, just as a healthy body. So that alone is enough, right? To bring awareness to this issue, because it's still happening and there is not enough guidance. Like no matter how many times some of us out here are talking about losing or just fueling for performance, and also making sure that your nutrition is not just supporting your nutrition, but also it's not just supporting your performance, but also your health, is really, I'm just still surprised that it's still happening. And especially at a high level with teams that have a lot of resources that they have access to. So not only did this part happen, but then through a series of either stress or, some other things that may have contributed. She ended up in the hospital with stomach pain, with a gut full of gas. And they did scopes and they did all that kind of testing, and there, weren't any problems there as far as in the GI tract or the stomach. But essentially what was happening is like all of that high fiber, that high protein, plus an insane amount of stress, because she's also in school, was causing it was basically causing the food to ferment in her GI tract. And we're going to talk about why that happened and like my thoughts on why that happened. I don't know for sure, but that's part of why I was asked about this situation and consulted. But the other layer of this as well that's really important to talk about because it isn't often thought about very much. But this whole situation happens. So she stops she stops training. She stops being able to compete in her sport. She also is then having issues with nutrition and her mindset and relationship with food. So she's now seeing a sports psychologist for that. And, this is just such a frustrating situation, because then on top of that, she starts seeing specialists who also tell her to change the way she's eating. So the GI doctor says to decrease fiber and go to a low fiber diet. And then the nutritionist she sees doesn't even look at her blood panels and just tells her to go on a different diet of a low FODMAP diet and an elimination diet. Meanwhile, this athlete is like tracking calories, tracking her food, super high stress. So I want you to take a step back and think about all of the things here that we've also talked about on this podcast in past episodes, and think about why like this is such a frustrating scenario. I'm going to walk you through some of the things that I saw as just being somebody that looks at the way that the body functions as a whole. And I'm hoping to use this as an example to bring awareness to the fact that there's a lot of pieces happening here and a lot of gaps that are being missed. So number one, when we're looking at the GI tract and we're looking at how it's functioning, what is often done when you have a GI issue is they scope it, right? They do a colonoscopy, maybe they'll do an endoscopy, they'll look at the stomach, they'll look at the esophagus, they'll look at the large intestine, the small intestine, and they're essentially looking for, like, those tests are done for integrity of the lining. So esophagus, stomach, looking at, is there potential for ulcers? As far as the small and large intestine, same thing. Are there, gaping issues? Are there polyps? Are there even potentially ulcers or just injuries there? Which you can see oftentimes with autoimmune disease, it's kind of gone out of control, like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. There can be severe issues there. So that's what those tests often are designed to do. They don't look necessarily at the microscopic scale. So that's that piece, right? And we're going to next move into the nutritionist's piece, which is she put this athlete on a low FODMAP diet without doing any further testing. A low FODMAP diet, as I've mentioned before on this podcast, in an episode, I think several episodes on the GI tract, one of my biggest concerns with putting athletes that experience any type of GI stress, just going on a low FODMAP diet alone isn't enough. And here's why. A low FODMAP diet may give you some information, like it might, if in fact it is something where the food that's going into the gut is causing that fermentation and causing that gas. Yes, that low FODMAP diet might be a good temporary solution. However, what often happens is two things. Number one, some athletes get put on like a permanent low FODMAP diet as if this is the solution to the issue. And the problem that I have with that is that So first off, a low FODMAP diet is very low carbohydrate because the certain types of foods that are high FODMAP, they're very typically very high carb, because the type of bacteria that is then living in the small and large intestine just thrives off of those carbohydrates, and it just produces methane. It produces gas. This can often be called SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And that's why the low FODMAP diet was created, was to try to reduce those high FODMAP foods, which typically include your high carbohydrate foods, many different types of fruits, starches, potatoes, rice, any type of, usually what athletes will, consume as far as for carbohydrates. This takes that all out. So that can be a okay short-term solution to try to either treat SIBO along with, or that small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or try to treat that imbalance, because you're trying to decrease not feed that type of bacteria. So eventually it goes away. But there are some other things that you need to be doing at the same time in order to change that. Here's the other thing. If you don't actually know if it is in fact SIBO, or if you don't know what's going on with the microbiome because you haven't tested for it, if you put a low FODMAP diet in, not only are you potentially making it very difficult for that athlete to be able to fuel well, but you're also potentially changing around that bacteria when you have absolutely no idea what's going on there. And that can have huge implications. Here's an example of why that's a potentially very risky situation. Over time, we've seen in many different studies, I just talked about this actually on a different podcast. I was talking about cardiovascular disease and hypertension. And one of the studies that I used for that episode was that what they found was in these GI tracts that had low diversity of different types of bacteria, over time, they found that there were certain types of bacteria, as well as overall low diversity of bacteria, that were correlated with hypertension and cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And then they took it a step further, and they took a sample of the GI bacteria in these people with these chronic diseases, as well as another cohort that had, it was their control, that had healthy, no cardiovascular disease, no diabetes, no chronic issues in that sense. And they took samples of both of their GI tract bacteria and put them in mice. And what they found was that the mice then either were the same as the control group, or the ones that had the GI bacteria from the cardiovascular, diabetes, and hypertension patients or subjects also got those same conditions. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because when you start messing with the GI bacteria, like you start doing a low FODMAP diet that can not only reduce certain types of bacteria, but also reduce multiple different types of bacteria, you start messing with something that could have very serious consequences and possibilities. So I bring all of this up because I don't want to get lost in the weeds, but I just want to put this out there for anybody, any athlete who, first off, needs to lose weight for their sport, or is dealing with any different type of GI related condition like this. Get a GI panel. Work with somebody who understands and works with the GI tract and also understands female athletes, because there are so many pieces going on here that if you are just focusing on one piece of it, it's going to be very difficult to not only keep up with sport, but also to, that I'm worried for this athlete, because I'm concerned that she's not going to get the answers that she needs in order to really get back to being healthy. And This also comes from a place of me also seeing a lot of athletes that have dealt with these conditions for long periods of time because they haven't gotten the answers that they need. So here's where I would like to transition this episode into what can you do? What are some of the things that if you need to lose weight for your sport, what are some of the things you can do and how can you do it in a way that is going to be successful, but also good for your health? Number one is let's remember that a healthy athlete is one who can keep performing. If you cut weight too quickly, and in some cases, if you get to that point, and then if you also lose your period, your performance will likely decrease along with that. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure that as you are trying to lean out or lose weight or cut weight, that you're doing it in a way that supports your, you not only need to support your training, but you also need to do it in a way that supports keeping your body healthy. So if you're going to be continuing to train 15 to 20 hours a week and cut weight, then we need to do it very, very, very slowly and at a calorie deficit that is minimal. So that you are, and part of this goes into, first off, understanding what type of load is on your system. So stress from school or stress from life plays a role, as well as stress from sport. There's a lot of things on there that puts a lot of stress on the body. So it needs, first, as you have heard, especially on this podcast, is that part of what we need to do then in that case is make sure that the foods that you're consuming are actually trying to reduce that stress. I'll also, send you back to a previous episode we did as well, where I talked about, being very careful about certain types of supplements and being, and paying attention to your training cycles, because one of the things we want to be careful there as well is that we don't end up in that fatigued, overreaching state. And this actually ties to another athlete that I saw and have been working with over the last couple of months that is in an entirely different sport than this, but is also trying to lean out because for her sport, it does make a really, really big difference because part of what she does is fly through the air. and she also was trying to lean out, cut weight at the same time as her training sessions were. I mean, she barely even had any rest days and she was doing multiple hours a day. And again, with that athlete as well, she experienced that fatigue, that breakdown, which we caught much sooner than that. But point being, this is something that happens often, and cutting weight while you're in the middle of your training session where you're trying to make big gains in your performance is a very, very, very tricky place to be. It would be ideal to try and do that cutting weight in the off season, because you don't have that same stress from training and you're not trying to, when you're in a training season and in a training section of what you are doing for your sport, what the goal should be there is making sure that your nutrition is optimal to support your training and to support the stress on the body. So for athletes out there who are like, okay, I do really need to try to figure this out and I do need to lean out for my sport, I would highly recommend trying to do that in the off season. And then utilize your in-season, your training season to really focus on not just maintaining, but also getting your performance nutrition dialed in. That would be the ideal scenario. If you're in a different scenario, what I would suggest is first off, get somebody that knows female athletes and the cycle that you naturally go through, and that can give you guidance on how to eat and how much to eat and how to fuel around your workouts. We've talked about all of these aspects on this podcast in many different episodes, so you can go back to a lot of them. Really great resources for you. But the thing that I want to drive home for this particular podcast is, first off, pay attention to your in seasons and off seasons, and then also make sure that your goals align with what that is, right? This, for this athlete, what would have been ideal would have been to say, okay, well, is there, do we potentially just like reduce training a bit to try to accomplish a goal so you can still maintain, but then are able to take some of that stress and load off of the system, then we can make sure that you're still eating enough, but at a minor, like lower amount, so that it promotes that, right? Too much stress on the body can shut down the thyroid, can shut down your hormone systems, which is essentially what I'm arguing has happened with this particular athlete, because low calorie diets plus super high stress is very stressful for the thyroid. The thyroid is part of your metabolism. Every single cell in the body uses thyroid hormone. And part of what can cause that SIBO, that fermenting in the gut, is when motility in the gut slows down. So, you know, typically you experience motility in your gut as you have to go to the bathroom at the same time, you know, every single day, maybe multiple times a day. And, you know, your gut is just clearing things out. It's digesting, it's doing its job. And, you know, the food you eat is eventually getting out of your body, and it's the cycle. But when things go wrong and when that motility slows down, which it can often do with thyroid, there's low thyroid function, then things start to sit in the gut for way too longer, and then they can start to ferment. So there's many different aspects that are happening here. And if her thyroid is part of what slowed down in this scenario, then I would venture to guess that there were some other things going on with her hormones as well. And all of these pieces all add up for not just an athlete that performs well, but also one that's really healthy. So keep that in mind the next time that if something goes wrong with your body and you're trying to figure out what's going on, remember to think about it, or find somebody that can help you think about it from a systems-based approach that's looking at everything that's going on in the body, because it is all connected. The GI tract and the thyroid, you know, they kind of go hand in hand in a sense. Also, the way that you treat your body with, you know, stress and food and all of those things can also have an impact on many different systems in the body as well. So we really need to make sure that we're considering that. The last thing that I would maybe wrap up on this is just that eating more fiber for a GI tract that is not prepared to eat more fiber, just like randomly increasing the amount of fiber that you're consuming, can put so much stress on the GI tract. One of the very critical pieces of working with the gut and working with people who have low diversity of GI bacteria to then help them be able to eat more foods is to go at this from a very, 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 very slow incremental increase in those fibers. For example, if somebody has SIBO, or if somebody has some situation where they can't eat a lot of foods because it causes a ton of gas and problems, one of the things you can do over time is take a very small amount, like a tablespoon of a certain type of food, and introduce that into the body. And over time, just be eating, you know, a tablespoon of that food and then slowly increase the amount of it. So maybe 1 tablespoon turns into 2 tablespoons. 2 tablespoons turns into maybe a little bit around like a quarter cup. And you can do this with almost any food. But if you do this over, you know, a month's period of time, you can then get the bacteria to be in the GI tract that helps to then break down that certain type of food. But if you just go from not eating a whole ton of food, like low calorie diets, to then eating a ton of fiber, you're likely going to cause problems for the GI tract because it just doesn't have what it needs in order to be able to break all of that food down. So that can then, of course, have, you know, an impact on hormones and all sorts of things, because you've now just made that system entirely inflamed, and it doesn't, you know what to do with itself at that point. So to wrap this up, because I think I'm hoping that I've, you know, sort of driven this home, this point, I really, really hope that from this episode, one of the things that has come across is first off, when you need to cut weight for a sport, make sure you do it in a way that supports your natural, you know, hormone cycle. Make sure that it is in a way that is not going to produce even more stress on an already stressed body. Number 2, try to do it in the off season when the stress on the system is a bit lower. And then again, if you have to do it in your in season, adjust your goals. And then the third thing is, if something goes wrong with your GI tract, or if something goes wrong with your hormones, or if something goes wrong in some other way, don't just think about training and food and all of those things. Take a step back and find somebody that can help you take this into perspective, as far as think about all the systems in the body that could be contributing to this particular issue, and then go at it with that approach. Because in the end, that's the one that's going to help you get the most help. When we're just looking at it with just one specialty in mind, like we're just looking at the GI tract and that's all that we're looking at, and we just tell you to eat low fiber, that doesn't even take into account the thyroid and any of those other pieces and the stress on that particular athlete, we're going to miss something that could have long-term, potential effects for that particular athlete person, right? So I know that this was kind of more of a different episode than we usually do, but I hope that it was helpful. And I do hope that this reaches somebody, that if you are in this scenario, please find somebody that understands athletes, that understands female athletes and physiology, because it is so critical to make sure that, first off, I would love for every single female athlete to have the resources to be able to be the best athlete that you can possibly be, but also be able to perform really well and be healthy at the same time. So that's our episode for now. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow us Sports on all social media channels, and make sure to share this episode with anyone you think may love it. You can follow me at Dr. Kirstin on Facebook and Instagram, and drkirstin.com. If you'd like to reach us with any comments or questions about this episode, you can at info.sports.com, and you can always leave a direct message with us over on social media as well. Thank you so much for listening, and I will be back next week. Take care.